I'm sorry I cannot be at Linfield. I'm just unwell, so don't want to spread the joy and viruses around. So I'm just going to talk to you via Zoom. And as Selina said, I'm involved in Sydney Edible Garden Trail. You may remember 3 years ago in 2018, that was the first edible garden trail in Blue Mountains. And we had a group from PSN visiting Blue Mountains and seeing beautiful edible gardens. And in 2019, other people visited the gardens, and one of them was Bridget Kennedy, who was involved with Repair Cafe and other community groups. And she decided that it would be a great idea to do something like that in Sydney. So Bridget has talked to Laurie Green, who is founder of CropSwap, and also Nita Law from PSN has joined, and I was the last one to join the Four Ladies Committee. And we created Sydney Edible Garden Trail last year. And a week before it was going to be ready and start, we've got lockdown in Sydney. So we had to switch to virtual, and we ran this event over a weekend via a Facebook group, Facebook Live. And we were lucky because Costa Georgiadis, who also has got his activities cancelled, has offered that he will come and visit gardens. And he visited about a dozen gardens over that weekend last year, streaming live. So there was an enormous number of people joining in and visiting gardens virtually. So we are going to continue this tradition this year. We've got 68 gardens at present open. Some of them will be open for both virtual tours and for visiting, some only for virtual. So it depends on the owners. And you can find all this information on Sydney Edible Garden Trail, which I'm going to type into the chat for people on Zoom. Sydney Edible Garden Trail. And you can check all the info there. So what is happening this year? This is a non-for-profit project. So yes, we do charge for tickets, like $5 for the virtual trail, which is 3 days of reporters going through the gardens and streaming live from about 9 in the morning till 4 p.m. And then there will be also a weekend, 20 and 21st of March, so the third weekend of March, when there will be gardens open for visiting. So it's a separate ticket for that. So what we do with the tickets proceeds, we actually keep the money after we pay our bills, like website hosting and other things. We don't actually earn anything. We are all volunteers, but whatever money is left after necessary expenses, then the money go towards grants for community and school gardens. And from the money we collected last year, we put 8 grants out to community gardens and school gardens. So they have received them already and they put them to good use. So it's a community project. People can visit edible gardens. They can learn what to grow in Sydney and how to do it. They can see various aspects in each garden. Some people will have ducks or quails or chickens. There would be beehives or native beehives, various wicking beds and watering systems, aquaponics. It's a lot of information. So if you would like to see that, go to the website and check. The virtual trail starts this Sunday, the 17th. Sorry, that's not 17th. It's the 21st of February. So the coming Sunday. And we will have Costa Georgiadis going through several gardens in sort of West Northern Sydney and streaming live. And there will be also shorter segments. For example, I will be taking people on a virtual tour through my garden, while Costa is traveling from one garden to the other. So there will be always something happening on this Facebook group, which is called Virtual Sydney Edible Garden Trail. On the 27th and 28th of February, we will have 2 other people being reporters. So we'll have Tara, who is opening her garden as well for visitors, And we'll have Eric from Water Apps, which is a watering system for wicking beds. So there will be live tours, talks, workshops. Everything will be happening over the internet on this Sunday and then the last weekend of February. And we usually get visitors from all over the world. Last year we had people from Europe, mostly from Ireland and England, but also from Holland, I think from France, and we had people from the US and New Zealand too. So a lot of people are interested, especially people who are in similar climate zone. Sydney is warm temperate climate. So a lot of plants we grow, they can grow in Europe, but some of them they can grow in tropics. So people just got interested. And then we've got the third weekend of March, and you're highly encouraged to come and have a look because there will be a lot of permaculture gardens open, not just PSN members, but also permaculture Sydney West. There will be gardens open, sort of Parramatta Council and a little bit more west. So if you're interested, please come because I myself have learned a lot by visiting other people's gardens. So if you've got any questions, you can put them in a chat or you can just unmute yourself and ask me on screen. That would be great. But yes, Sydney Edible Garden Trail is coming up starting this Sunday with Costa Georgiadis on Facebook Live. Okay, any questions? Yes, no? Everyone knows all about it already? Okay, no questions. So we can proceed to the next part. Sel, what would you like to say? Do we go straight into my talk or is there anything else anyone wants to say?
I think we're good to go straight into your talk.
Oh, perfect. Oh,
Unless anyone, does anyone here have questions?
yes, Tong, if you have tickets for Edible Garden Trail for visiting gardens, yes, it's valid this year. Because people who bought tickets for last year, they couldn't go because there was a lockdown in Sydney. So we offered the virtual trail for free for people who had already tickets for visiting gardens, but you can visit this year using last year's ticket. I hope to see you around. I'm in Denniston. Are you going to come and visit me? All right, so if we don't have any more questions, and if you remember something, just put it in a chat room when you are on Zoom. So you can put it in a chat room and I can answer the questions later. But now I would like to talk to you about a very important thing. Most of us are gardeners. We have edible gardens, permaculture gardens, ornamentals, and to everything. So I would like to talk to you about what we do in autumn in our gardens. So I'm going to show you some slides. So I will talk to the slides. And again, if you have any question, just put it in a chat room. I will see that there is something happening in the chat so I can answer the question straight away. And I bet there will be a lot of questions because there are always questions when people talk about plants and gardens. So let me share my screen so you can see the slides. Okay, so autumn garden, and that's myself, obviously, Margaret Mosakowska. So the first thing, which probably everyone knows, everyone in permaculture knows, that if you plant anything in your garden, the garden has to be designed in such a way that the planting would benefit from conditions in this garden. So you have to know how the shade travels through your garden. And it's very important when you plant for winter, because some gardens get very heavy shade in winter and they may not be successful when it comes to planting something edible. My garden can be very windy because it's on a slope. So I have to have wind breaks to protect my veg, especially some fruit trees. Another important thing for the health of the garden is using crop rotation system if you can. And this is to avoid soil diseases build up and also pests sitting in a soil and, when you planted plants from one plant family, say something from brassicas, which is cabbage family, you don't plant brassicas a year after a year in the same spot because all the pests would accumulate in the soil and bacteria and other fungal diseases, and they would just attack year after year. So crop rotation is a really good idea. And another important thing, which probably everyone knows, again, being permaculturist, build an ecosystem. Build a garden which is strong, which would have a lot of different plants, not just food plants, but also medicinal plants and plants for pollinators, plants to deter insects. So it's very important that your garden is rich in diversity and it's more resilient that way. So what do we do in autumn? What do we do now? It's sort of mid-February, and we already have autumn weather. I think it's going to get a little bit warmer. We are not going to go into full autumn, but still it's not as hot as it usually is at this time of the year. So the first thing you do, you have to clear all your spent summer veg. And some of my cucumbers started already dying. And my tomatoes, I'm just picking the last one. So I think in probably a week, I would clear the tomato beds too. Another thing is checking your watering systems. Even in winter, we may get periods of dry weather, especially windy weather. And even if it's not hot, dry, strong wind desiccates the plants very quickly. So you still need a watering system even in winter. So you check hoses and drippers. They are usually blocked by ants setting nests inside or dead lizards, which have got the looking for water and they've got stuck. You can have watering systems like oyas, which is terracotta containers, which are dug into the soil and filled with water. So you need to check if they are not broken, because it's easy to break them if you start digging and you forget you've got the oyas inside. You have to check your wicking beds if they hold water well, because you do need water in winter too. It's a common mistake. A lot of people don't water the gardens properly. You have to be careful about overwatering, obviously, because wet and cold, it's not a good idea for growing veg, but you need water even in winter. So another important thing is crop rotation. So crop rotation, as I said, it's to avoid soil-borne diseases and pests. So I will talk about it in detail in a moment. Then important thing, you grow in summer a lot of very hungry plants like cucurbits, corn, and some root veggies. And where they grow in summer, it's a good idea to grow green manures in the beds where these veg were growing. And you could start growing green manures now and start growing your winter veggies in pannets. So the green manures, they will grow for about 8 weeks and you just chop them down, and that will be around the time when you have seedlings to plant. So you can actually plant the green manures now, and you need to use cold season green manures. And again, I will talk about them in detail in a moment. For autumn, it's also a good idea to build or repair supports and trellises, because you might be growing things like broad beans, which are pretty tall, so they would need some support. You may grow later on in April, you may decide to grow peas. So they are plants which need support. So you can do that in autumn. You have to review the seeds you have, especially if you've got some older ones, and you can have your own seeds, which are saved, and you can have seeds which you've got from the shops or bartered or whatever. So you need to check the age, and you have to check if they haven't been moldy or if they haven't had borers, which is very common with the bean seeds. So check everything. What I usually do with the old seeds, I put a lot of them in pannets because they've got much lower germination rate. So hopefully something will germinate, but to rely on, I usually get some fresh seeds. And again, you could barter or swap or buy. There is a Seed Savers Australia group on Facebook. So you could actually mail seeds via snail mail to other people, so you don't have to go to anyone for seeds. You can receive them via mail, and it's still much cheaper than buying a packet. Now, what's very important for autumn planting is to have right soil for each type of plant. And I will talk about the plants, and some of them like soils which are heavily composted with animal manures and acidic, and other like soil which are well composted, but they should not get animal manures, and they may like it alkaline. So you have to have right soil once you plan what goes where with crop rotation or not, depends on the garden. Then you have to prepare right soil for each type of plant at least 3 weeks before you plant. So the soil has got time to settle, and the organisms like bacteria and fungi and worms, they can start multiplying, which will help with the health of the soil. I'm just looking into chat room. Oh yeah, Share Seed Australia. Thank you, Cecilia. That was a good info. So right soil, and then the last step is sowing and planting. And some veg you can actually plant several times through autumn and winter till early spring. For example, root veg, carrots and beetroots, turnips, radishes, you can grow several crops of them. And the same with lettuces. You can also sow them several times. So I usually do this in pannets, and then wherever I see space and the soil is good, like it's the right pH, so it's the right acidity, then I just pop them in free spots. So yeah, sowing, planting, that's the last step after all this clearing and preparing and getting the soil ready for specific type of veg. So that's the crop rotation. I did crop rotation chart on 6 garden beds. Some people don't have 6 garden beds. You can actually divide your garden beds, or the plot in a garden. If you don't have specific garden beds, you can sort of divide it into sections and prepare soil differently in each section for different type of crops. So you can see if you had root crops in summer, in winter, you have to rest this area with green manures, and then you add compost, animal manures, and it's ready for summer planting of corn and cucurbit. So you can rest the whole bed through winter. Or not, if you don't have space, then what helps is adding a lot of compost and worm castings, because especially worm castings, the bacteria and fungi in worm castings, they combat a lot of fungal diseases of the soil. So obviously you would not plant root crops again in the same spot, but you can plant something else if you don't have the space to afford to keep a certain part of the garden fallow with green manures. And you could also plant green manures after you had corn and cucumbers or pumpkins. So that's another way of enriching the soil, not just adding compost and manures. You can also grow compost or green manure on the spot. So I also listed groups of plants, as you could see, and listed what can be planted in winter and for winter in autumn, and what is planted in spring for summer. So obviously anything from the Solanaceae family, so tomatoes and chili, eggplants, capsicums, and tomatillos, they are summer veg, so you would not plant them now. But onion family, in autumn you would be planting garlic and leek. So they are plants which need pretty long time of cool weather to grow well. So we plant them now. Garlic a little bit later, but you can plant leek now. For legumes, that would be peas and broad beans, and in springtime it's other beans and snow peas. So you can see this chart, you will see it on a recorded message as well, but I can also post just this chart on PSN Facebook so you could see it. So crop rotation, it's important because it does help with a lot of soil diseases and pests which can overwinter in the soil and then attack the same plants if you plant them in the same spot again. So green manures. Green manures in general are annual crops. So you grow them for several reasons. They add nitrogen to the soil. They add bulk organic materials, and they are called sort of carbon crops. And also some of them when you dig them or when you grow them, they create gases in the soil which kill nematodes. So that would be things like mustard, for example. So that's a photograph of green manures in my garden the other year. Green manures are also a good way of keeping empty beds free from weeds or unwanted plants, as I like to call them. They can also break up clay if you've got clay soil. Very often when you start a new garden or a new patch in your garden, it's a good idea to plant green manures on it first, because they will help with adding life to the soil, and then you chop them after about 8 weeks before they flower, usually when they are about 20, 30 centimeters tall, and they are nice and green and lush, very much like these ones. You can see there is no flower here, everything is green. You chop them and you leave them on a surface. I also like to add compost on top of them, and then I put dry mulch, I put dry mulch, not dry mulch, on the top. So you've got a lot of organic material to decompose before you start planting something else. And don't forget to keep watering. Even when you've got slashed green manure and it's dead, you still want to water this area because you want to keep the bacteria, beneficial bacteria and fungi alive. So you don't let them dry into hay, you keep this area watered. The other way of protecting slashed green manures from drying out is to cover, after you chop them down, you can cover them with hessian sacks. That will also keep the moisture in the soil, and that will help with this material you cut down to decompose and create better soil. So green manures, they are different plants which you put in autumn and different which you plant in springtime. And there are also, as I said, three types of green manures. Nitrogen fixers, so that would be anything from legume family like fava bean or lupins or cowpea in summer, mung bean, soybean. So they are nitrogen fixers because they will have bacteria in the roots which absorb nitrogen from the air. And once you chop them, everything starts disintegrating. The nitrogen from the roots goes into the soil, so it enriches the soil with nitrogen. Biofumigants, they are plants which, when they decompose, they release gases which kill nematodes. So in cold season, that would be mustard, and in warm season, that would be marigolds. And you probably know to plant marigolds near your tomato plants because marigolds deter nematodes. They are very strong smelling. And then plants which we call bulk carbon additives, and they are mostly annual grasses. So things like oats or barley, for example, or buckwheat or millet. So in winter, that's what you should plant. I mean, you should plant it now for winter, and that way you can prepare your soil for planting in about 2 months' time. So it's really time to put the green manures in the ground now. Now I will talk in details about the things to plant and how to prepare soil for them. It's a lot of plants out there which can be eaten, and they've got different requirements regarding how much sunlight they need and how fertile the soil is and how fine, and the acidity of the soil, also temperature range, because some plants need cool temperatures to germinate and some need warm, and water requirements. There is a lot of good information about particular plants on the Green Harvest website. And on Gardenate website and the app, you can see the timing of sowing and planting various food crops. So both Green Harvest and Gardenate, they concentrate on edible plants and also plants which are good for chickens and plants for insects. And Gardening Australia, Organic Gardener magazine, they've got websites too, but there is much broader type of plants because they also talk about ornamentals. Let me have a look at the chat because I can see it's blinking. Thousands of marigold seeds. Yep, that's something to be planted in springtime. So, talk to Cecilia. She's got a lot of marigolds. So, important thing, plant what you eat. because there is no point of planting something, a lot of something which you are going to try, and then you don't like it, and you wasted a lot of garden surface planting something you are not sure you're going to like. So the first thing, plant the veggies you eat often and plant herbs, because herbs are expensive to buy. When you calculate the price of herbs per kilogram, they are very expensive. And then once you've got the things covered, the things you eat often and you like to eat, then try to experiment with other stuff. Or you can experiment with other stuff, not in a garden, but in large pots. So that gives you more flexibility. Let me see what appears in the chat. Yeah, cosmos seeds, yep, they are also good. They are really good for plants, for insects in summertime. Yes, you can grow more things compared to what you need, and you can swap. That's what I often do. I grow a lot of fruit. That's the first thing, because I've got a lot of fruit trees, and I can't possibly eat or process 30 or 40 kilograms of oranges. No way. I can save some of them, but when it gets warm, you cannot save them for a very long time. So I process, I dehydrate, and I also swap. So you can also think about planting for swapping. So if that's something you want to do. So let me see what else. All right. So the first thing which is really important, and you can see my garden here. When you look at my garden, this is north and this is east. So the sun travels this way, which means the garden is really exposed to a lot of sun. It's on a slope as well. And you can see there is more open space here with young fruit trees. And that's where I've got bigger trees. And that's an open space again with some annual veggies. So you have to be careful where you plant, especially when you plant for growing in autumn and winter, because you may not have enough sun. So if you grow something for fruit or for succulent heads like cabbages or cauliflowers, which are flowering plants, or for roots, they would need at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sun. Otherwise, you will have a lot of greenery, a lot of leaves, but you will not have enough, the plants will not be able to accumulate enough sugars and starches to create large roots or large cabbage heads. So that's the first thing when people complain they only ever get small cabbages and small beetroots. It's because they don't have enough sun. So 6 to 8 hours of direct sun, even in winter, it's important. If you don't have that much sun, it's not all is lost. So double shade or 3 to 4 hours of direct sun, dark green leafy veg will grow really nicely. So beetroots, but mostly for leaves because they will not form large roots. Kale, English spinach, most Asian greens, lettuces, um, also Florence fennels and fennels in general. They would grow with less sun, especially in winter. So it's important to work out where you've got enough sun in winter if you want to get decent crops for something you plant in autumn. Now, so that was the sun. Now back to soil. Growing soil is what you do. You don't grow plants, you grow soil. And once you grow decent soil, anything will grow in it, provided there is enough sun. So you can add organic materials, and that would be compost and animal manures and soft mulches, green manures, and soil conditioners. Soil conditioners are needed to change the structure of the soil and also to change the acidity. And it's easier to make acidic soil alkaline than to make alkaline soil acidic. Compost is absolutely great, especially if you need to introduce more acidity. But compost is it's a really good thing to make the soil more productive. It introduces life into the soil and the plants grow much better. So yes, you can add some inorganic soil conditioners, like you can add a little bit of clay if you've got really sandy soil, or you can add sand and gypsum into clay soil. And my garden is on brick quality red clay. So I started with digging through and digging some sand and a little bit of gypsum into it. but I also piled a lot of organic material on top, and that causes a lot of animals like worms and other smaller organisms coming, and the worms started drilling holes into the soil, dragging organic material in. So now I don't have bad clay, I've got pretty good soil where I grow veggies. Obviously, where I've got the lawn, the soil is still awful, but after years of growing grass and putting anything I cut, if I mow the grass, I actually put it back onto the lawn. So it returns the nutrients to the soil. So the things you prepare when you prepare the soil, structure, it has to be well drained. Most veggies, especially in winter, they would hate standing in water. I'm not talking about the water plants like kangkong or water chestnuts. I'm talking about typical veggies which you want to plant in the soil. So it has to be well drained, it has to be crumbly. So when you get a fistful of slightly wet soil and you squeeze it and you let it go, you will see bits stuck together. It won't be stuck as solid as clay, but it won't be falling apart like sand. So structure of the soil, it's really important because it helps the plant's roots to get access to the air, and also they won't be standing in water. So well drained. Water holding capacity. So there has to be this Goldilocks spot, not too much, not too little. The excess water away would drain, but the soil would not dry out too fast. So if you've got sandy soil, adding clay and also adding something that holds water like perlite or vermiculite, that would help to hold water in a soil which dries very easily. Soil acidity is important, and on the scale, the lower pH, the more acidic soil. So the neutral is about 7, but most veggies like sort of 6.5 to 7. And it's good to invest in a pH kit. You can get it from most garden centers just to check what the soil is, so you know if it's the right pH. I have seen recently on Facebook people complaining that they bought this compost from commercial landscape companies, and it was full of pesticides, but also compost from landscapers very often has got the pH out of whack, could be too alkaline. So it's always the best way of preparing the soil is to use your own compost, or just pile a lot of materials on top of the soil, which is called no-dig gardening or lasagna garden. And you can add organic material to the soil this way instead of buying compost mix, which may actually kill your garden. And then nutrients are very important, and that's the minerals. So minerals, macro and micro elements, and they are usually present in compost. But for example, Australian soils are very deficient in magnesium. So it's always a good idea to add some dolomite to the soil, which contains magnesium and calcium. Calcium is very important for fruiting plants because it helps to keep the fruit pretty solid, and especially with tomatoes and zucchinis, to avoid blossom end rot. Let me see the questions in the chat room. Okay, tree service. Tong, I don't know what sort of trees you've got. Most trees can be pruned in winter. So, but you need to check because it's especially deciduous trees when they can be pruned in winter is the best time. So you need to check, or you just contact me and let me know what trees you've got. I'm not, and you're asking why compost mix kills soil. That could be for two reasons. Commercial compost mixes could be too alkaline or too acidic, and also they may have residue of pesticides and fungicides. And this happens because they use animal manures from animals which have been given antibiotics, or they fed on pastures, or they've been fed grain which was grown using pesticides. So you can get pesticides and herbicides, yep, through animal manures, And you can also get pesticides residue from straw and other plant material which is composted by the commercial landscapers. And I actually have seen firsthand a friend of mine. She purchased a lot of good compost mix from landscaping company to fill her raised garden beds. And the compost looked really nice. It was brown and crumbly and it smelled right. But when she planted into it, nothing would grow. So I had cabbage. I had 2 kilogram cabbages, and her cabbages were about 5 centimeters high and with misshapen leaves. So it's always the best idea to grow your own compost, grow green manures, or use lasagna gardening method to add organic matter to the soil. When I started my raised garden beds, they are dug into the ground a bit, so I would dig out some soil which was mostly clay and put it aside, put the garden bed in, and then I would buy sand. And I would mix sand with a little bit of clay and with vermiculite to increase water holding capacity. And then I would put on top of the sand, I would put a lot of organic matter, could be my compost, animal manures, lucerne hay, a lot. I would put about 30 to 40 centimeters on the top, and then I would plant into it. And after about 2 years, instead of sand, I've got this nearly black, very dark, rich soil. So you don't need to buy compost. You may just buy sand and put organic materials on top. That would work too. Okay, so preparing the soil. Now, it's really important that the veggies you are going to grow in winter have good food because they don't have too much sun. In winter, the sun is not as strong. So they have to be in a sunny spot to grow well, and they have to have a lot of nutrients. And the most cool season veg, they are pretty large. So things like cabbages, cauliflowers, broccoli, really the only thing which could be compared when it comes to summer veg would be tomatoes and pumpkins in terms of the biomass, the nutrient mass you're going to grow. And the roots veg as well. Things like turnips and radishes, carrots, beetroots, they need to have a lot of compost and animal manure so they would grow to the full size and you would have good crops. But you have to be careful, and I will talk in details in a second. You have to be careful so you give the right fertilizer or the right nutrients to the correct groups of plants. And if you grow flowering and fruiting veg, so that would be broccoli and cauliflowers, they are flowers. Broad beans and peas, they would also need potassium or sulfate of potash for flowering and then for fruit formation. So it's slightly different fertilizers you give to green plants or root plants and to plants you grow for flowers and fruit. The other important consideration before you go to the garden and chuck the seeds into the soil, it's different groups of plants do better as either seeds or seedlings. So most of root veg, they should be sown directly into the garden because when you transplant seedlings, that usually damages the tiny tip of the root, which is the growth root, and then the roots will fork in the soil. So root veggies, I always grow them uh, straight into the soil. I put the seeds in the soil, and I usually put a little bit more seeds because not all of them would germinate well. And if they are too thick, I thin them. And young beetroots, you can use them in salad. The young one before they start forming roots. You can use young seedlings to eat. The same with carrots. You can eat the carrot greens. So I just thin them and then I eat the thinnings. And I wait for the rest, which has got more space now, to grow into the proper size. Leafy veg with small seeds, so that would be mostly brassicas and onion family. They are much better if you plant them into the garden as seedlings. So you start them in boxes or pallets, and you start them now to transplant them to the garden. So onions and and leeks, that's the same family, so it's better to start them with punnets. Garlic usually has large beets, so I said leafy stuff with small seeds. And I'm talking leafy because bulbs of onions and garlic, they are not roots, they are not root veggies. The bulbs are actually parts of the stem. So even if we talk about onion root or garlic root or something like that, that's not roots. So root veggies, they are the ones which really use the proper root to put all the energy into to store starches and sugars. So beetroots and carrots and radishes and turnips, they are real root veggies. So fruiting plants with large seeds. You can start them in containers or you can plant them into the garden. They're much easier to plant with small seeds. So broad beans and peas and garlic, then they can be sown into the garden or into toilet paper rolls. Because if you put them into punnets, they usually grow the root very quickly down at roughly the same speed as the plant goes up. So if you just plant into a punnet, broad beans, which would be about 5 centimeters tall, would need about 5 centimeters deep punnet. So I usually, if I put them in instead of the ground, because for example, I didn't clear this patch of the garden yet, so I cannot plant broad beans or peas. I put them in toilet paper rolls filled with the seedling mix. And then when I've got the part of the garden ready for planting of broad beans or peas, I just pop the whole toilet paper rolls into the soil and they disintegrate because it's paper. So, that's the way I plant them. Let me see what are the questions in the chat. Yeah, banana peels are good to get potassium. I do the same. I actually soak them a little bit longer. And what I do, I did it when I harvested a bunch of bananas, which had 130 bananas on it in my garden. So what I did, um, I dried most of the bananas. So I processed them in one day. So I had skins of about 100 bananas in one day, which I soaked in a barrel of water. And I've got liquid fertilizer and also rotting banana peels. They can be also put around plants, but they have to be really rotten through so the rats would not eat them. So yes, it's a good way of adding potassium. Potassium also is present in wood ash, but only if you burn small twigs and something that's got a lot of bark. Because solid wood, like the wood we are burning, does not contain enough potassium. Potassium is sitting under the bark and in the bark. So you can, if you want potassium, you need to burn leaves, small twigs, and bark. Yep, dried banana skins, you can use them too. Oh, you dehydrate them, Cecilia. Great idea. But I usually just use several banana skins per week if I'm not processing the whole bunch. So I usually just put them in compost. So my compost will get more potassium that way. All right, so seeds or seedlings, depending on what is the plant family, you would do better with seeds when you do root veggies, put them into the soil. You do better with seedlings for the large leafy greens and leeks and onions. And the rest you can do either or. So now we are arriving at the list of what to plant in autumn and how to prepare the soil. So you can see some things like slightly acidic and some like neutral to slightly alkaline. So you have to consider several things. You have to consider the soil requirements. And then you have to consider companion planting, which is important. So you should not really plant beetroots and cabbages together. They are not good companions, but the thing is also beetroot prefers something that's neutral or alkaline, and cabbages like actually slightly acidic. So beetroots, compost, organic fertilizer, not too much nitrogen. So no chicken manure, for example, because that would promote the green leafy growth. So unless you grow your beetroots for leaves, don't add a lot of nitrogen high animal manures, like because that will cause the plant to have very nice big leaves, but there would be very small root. Broad beans, they like sort of acidic alkaline, so it's on both sides of the neutral. You can lime your soil if it's too acidic, because that's a common problem with Australian soils. They are too acidic. And if you keep adding compost, compost is acidic too. So before you plant broad beans, check if your soil it's not too acidic, and the same with beetroots. Broccoli is from the same family as cabbage, but you can see the pH for broccoli, it's more on neutral alkaline side, and cabbage, it's a little bit on the acidic side. I usually plant them together because I mostly add compost to my soil. So it sort of evens out the pH. And of course, I check it. If it's too acidic, I may add a little bit of lime. You have to prepare the soil several weeks, at least 3 to 6 weeks before you plant. So it's a good idea to prepare soil now. And then you can plant these veggies at the end of March. Carrots. Carrots, I actually plant carrots into really fertile soil, but not with fresh animal manures. And the most important thing for carrots is the soil needs to be really finely worked, because carrot roots, they usually fork for two reasons. If the soil has got large lumps in it, and if you water from the top. Because when you water from the top and you don't do deep watering, then the soil, it's wet mostly in the upper layer. And that means that the carrot roots, they cannot find the water in a deep layer of the soil. So they turn to go to the sides, and therefore you get really funny carrots with two or three roots which go sideways. So important thing for carrots, friable soil, and also deep watering. And the best carrots I grow, they usually grow in my wicking beds, because the water is under, the water is deep down. So once the carrots grow, they feel there is more water deep down, and they go straight down. I get straight and long carrots this way. Cauliflower, and this is more like broccoli, so sort of neutral and slightly alkaline. And it does a lot of nitrogen and potassium because it's a flowering plant. So obviously all brassicas are heavy feeders. If you want to get a decent size head, you have to feed them. The last spring, I didn't really have really good crops of brassicas, and that's because it started to get too warm too soon. There was warm winter and really warm and early spring. And what happened is brassicas, instead of growing lush plants, they feel, okay, it's warm, it's springtime, I have to produce seed. So instead of growing big plant and big head, they just created small heads, and they are ready to bolt into flowers. So it also depends on the weather. But if you plant them as soon as you can into really rich soil, hopefully they will gain enough size through winter to support large heads, because it's only large plants, large cabbages, large broccolis and cauliflowers, which will support large heads. So other plants you can plant now or in March. Florence fennel, and you can see really acidic soil, 5.5. And radishes too, they also like acidic soil. And the Florence fennel and radishes, they need a good supply of water so they don't get too tough. The same with turnips. So you can see these three types of plants, acidic soil and the consistent moisture, so they don't get tough. And obviously with radishes and turnips, you plant the seed, and with Florence fennel, you plant seedlings. With leeks is the same, well composted soils, and I've got leeks nearly as thick as my wrist, the biggest ones. So they grow really big in good compost. They are all slow growing, especially onion family plants, leeks and onions. They usually sort of sit through winter and they seem not to grow at all. And then they explode into growth in springtime and they start getting the storage materials to form onion heads and bigger leeks in sort of late spring and early summer. So you have to be patient and you have to know, okay, they will be in the spot for a very long time. Not like radishes and turnips, which grow very fast, especially radishes, except for the Japanese radishes, all radishes can be planted in autumn. And what I usually do, I plant rows of radishes between beetroots and carrots because radishes mature first. So I pull them up and I eat them. And then the beetroots and carrots, they have more space to grow. I usually keep beetroots, carrots, and onions and radishes in the same garden bed in long lines. So, excuse me, so that works pretty well. Okay, lettuces. This time of the year, you can try growing head lettuces. But I usually prefer loose leaf lettuces. I don't like head lettuces. But if you want to try one, now it's the time. And lettuces are another plant like radishes, which you can plant several times between sort of late summer and early summer. Because when it gets too hot, lettuces bolt into flowers. But otherwise, they grow pretty well through most of the growing season in Sydney and they do like a lot of moisture, but they don't like acidic soil. So don't plant them with radishes because radishes like acidic. And again, look at companion planting. It's a lot of good information online to find it. And I believe Green Harvest has also got a poster you can order. Excuse me, just losing my voice. So that's the most common plants which you can get ready to plant in your garden. There is many more. You can check them on the Green Harvest website. Now back to permaculture, use and value diversity. And diversity means your garden will be less fragile. It will be more resilient. And diversity, it could be polyculture, which is planting different types of plants in the same space. Companion planting is one of the examples, plant guilds, but also using different varieties of the same veg. It could be late variety or early one, could be planting them, say, every 3 to 4 weeks. Um, it could be different colors as well because some of them grow faster, some grow slower. For example, I used to grow a variety of beetroot, which is called bull's blood. It's got really dark reddish leaves, sort of metallic reddish with a little bit of green. And they look very impressive, but I cannot really grow them in springtime because when it starts getting more sunny, the leaves are too dark. They cannot manage full sun. So the beetroots actually of this variety, they are not doing as well as beetroots with just green leaves. So, that's another thing I have learned. The same with the purple potatoes. They also have darker leaves. So when I planted them in previous years, when you get the hotter summers, they would die first, even without forming proper sized tubers. So it's also the things we learn when we plant different varieties of the same veg. You will see what works in your garden and what doesn't. And very important thing, don't just leave your food garden to sort of manage itself. Unseen garden will not thrive, will not produce a lot of food. So good idea if you can, if you've got enough sun and space, is to have your veggie patch in zone 1 of your garden, which is near the house. And I do have 4 annual garden beds just at the back door. And also that's where I have potted herbs. So I can see my annual beds pretty often because I walk past on my way to the chickens, which I have to visit at least twice a day. And you can see any problems like pest attacks and lack of water and sprouting weeds. You have to observe your garden to see any problems before they become too big. So that's the end. So you know where to find me. So I'm just going to stop sharing. So let me see if anyone has got any questions, or is everyone completely and thoroughly bored or falling asleep? Hopefully not. Hopefully not. So yes, this session has been recorded. So if you're happy about that, or you can recommend the recording to someone else, or you can come back and review it. And I'm going to publish this little poster with a 6-bed crop rotation system onto PSN Facebook page, the official one, and Facebook PSN group, so you could see them too. So thank you very much for listening to me.